Da-da-da-da.
Now. Got it. Hello. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
I'm well, Morgan. How are you?
Good, good. How was your Valentine's Day?
It was an endless delight. And one of the advantages of being married it's been 10 years for me this year, is that you get a lot of practice at Valentine's Day. And I am just really good at it now.
You're going to have to give me tips. I've only been at it a few years.
Well, I don't have any tips.
Well, there you go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event. My name is Morgan Murray. I'm Cape Breton-based author of the book Dirty Birds, recently longlisted for the CBC Canada Reads thing. Not shortlisted, but what can you do? This is
Still a list
on the illustrious loser tour, but I'm joined by a winner, author of Slaughterhouse-Five, or the other author of Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah, I did it with my buddy Kurt. We worked on it together.
It's good to have good buddies.
Yeah.
Who are you, Ryan, when you're not Slaughterhouse-Fiving?
Well, I am a writer and cartoonist in Toronto. I've done a webcomic called Dinosaur Comics for almost 20 years now. I've written tons of comics for places like Marvel and DC. And I've also written some books of nonfiction. The most recent one is called How to Invent Everything, a survival guide for the stranded time traveler. And it's a book about if he gets trapped in the past, how to rebuild civilization from scratch. And also I adapted most recently adapted Slaughterhouse-Five into a graphic novel with Albert Montes that you've got behind you.
Yes, it's a beautiful book. How do you invent everything? How thick?
Slowly and carefully. It's what do we say about this thick?
Okay.
I mean, the title does oversell it a little. It should really be called How to Invent a Bunch of Stuff. But it is a viable way to rebuild civilization from scratch, from first principles and technology.
We might need that.
Yeah, who can say?
Dear God. Cool. So, yeah, I reread your book the other day because I wanted to be prepared, and then I went and reread the other Slaughterhouse-Five, the lesser one with lesser illustrations.
Wow. It's a bold take to start this off with.
Just to remind myself of how it went, and I gotta hand it to you, man. You did one heck of a job.
Thank you.
Tell me how that was to write with your buddy Kurt.
It was hard. It was really hard. Because Slaughterhouse-Five, I wouldn't have agreed to turn it into a comic if I didn't already love the book, and I didn't want to be the guy who wrecks Vonnegut, right? Like, you don't want to do a bad adaptation of a book, and especially a book that you love. And so a lot of it was fear, but a lot of it was the desire to motivate the adaptation, right? Like, if you're doing an adaptation, why are we doing this? Are we doing a picture? Are we doing just an illustrated book, or are we trying to make it feel like it's actually a comic? And so The main goal with the book was to make it feel like it had been born in the medium. If you had somehow never heard of Kurt Vonnegut, you could pick up this book and say, oh, that was a good comic, and not, oh, that was a good adaptation of a clearly non-illustrated story with pictures thrown in. So it was sort of the goal of making it feel like this was where the story lived, which, was fun. I gave myself the story that I was an editor, and I had commissioned Kurt Vonnegut to write a comic for me, and he had screwed up royally and written this prose novel. And so my job on a deadline was to convert this novel into the best graphic novel I could and cover for what Kurt had done. And it's always fun to tell yourself a story when you're working on something. And that was how it went. But I want to ask you about Dirty Birds. I feel like I've known you as a human being, and then suddenly I'm reading this book and I was like, oh man, Morgan, like, where did this great author come from? How does this happen? These hidden talents that I didn't know existed, and just whip off this, first novel, and it's good. it's long list good. which is crazy. Like I've never been longlisted for anything.
Oh, go on. Thank you. Ryan was actually on me and my wife's first date. You were our chaperone.
I was. And you know, I don't want to take all the credit for your relationship and everything that's wonderful has come out of that, but I should take some of the credit. So I should be on the long list of people responsible for your happiness.
You're on the long list of our lives. Yeah, I was a secret novelist, I guess. For Dirty Birds came out very slowly and painfully until it came out all at once.
Like going bankrupt.
Yes. So it's based a lot on my life. I was once so I should explain the plot of Dirty Birds, because fewer people have read it than Slaughterhouse-Five, say. Dirty Birds is the story of this young dummy. He's 22, 23 years old. He graduates from the Polytechnic University of Saskatchewan, PUS for short, and he leaves his parents' basement in Bellybutton, Saskatchewan, a little village in the middle of nowhere, and goes to Montreal to become a famous poet and ladies' man like his hero Leonard Cohen. And stuff goes off the rails for poor old Milton, Ontario. That's his name too, is Milton, Ontario. And so yeah, I was once lived in the middle of nowhere in Alberta. I grew up on a small beef farm there. I left the farm and went to the University of Calgary and ended up moving to Montreal after I graduated to become a famous poet and ladies' man like my hero Leonard Cohen, and none of that happened. And so I decided if I wasn't going to be a famous poet, I should at least sneak my bad poetry into a novel about that time in my life. And that's kind of where the idea came from.
Was the poetry like legitimate Morgan poetry?
Most of it is.
Did you have to punch it up or punch it down, or was it just chef kiss straight off the griddle?
It was so Milton, there's dabblings of his horrible poetry. He wants to be a poet, but he has no poetic talent whatsoever, and he writes all these really bad poems. His early stuff, like when he's in high school, I had to make that up as I was writing the book, and it was pretty hard to write bad poetry on purpose. And so when I got to the parts where he's in Montreal,
I've never found it hard to write bad poetry. I don't know. Everything I've ever written is bad.
But you were probably trying to not be bad. But then when he gets to Montreal, I went back and dug up a bunch of my old poetry and put it in the book. So joke's on you, rejection letters. And so yeah, anyway, so Milton ends up having all these terrible misadventures, and he does meet Leonard Cohen, and he does become famous, and he does become rich, but it's all horrible, and everything isn't what he had hoped and dreamed. And I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't got to it yet, but yeah, so I just took kind of that few months of my life and thought I could write a novel about it, not knowing anything about writing a novel. And then I had a short story in a collection, and the editor of the collection was like, "What are you working on?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm making a dresser at home, and I got this going on at work and stuff." No, what are you writing, you idiot? So I said I had this novel about a poet, and he happened to be a poet, and he was like, "I love it, we'll do it." And like 4 years later, I finally wrote it, and now 3 years later, here it is. So
this publishing is so slow, eh?
Everything
Kurt
about
did
slow.
Yeah, Kurt had his first draft of Slaughterhouse-Five in the 60s, and we're only getting around to the graphic novel now in 2020. It's 50 years late.
Well, I hear he made a real mess of the manuscript. So.
Sort of, I guess one of the reasons why I thought it'd be good for us to have a conversation together is that you have this wonderful praise on the book that refers to you as Canada's Vonnegut, which is, I think, the highest praise I've ever seen. It's great. And one of the reasons why I might describe you as Canada's Vonnegut, if I could even say the phrase, is you have the pictures in your book, just like in Slaughterhouse-Five, little pictures by the author drawn in, which works like gangbusters. And I don't know why everyone doesn't do it. But I wanted to ask you about the thought behind that. If there was, are you just like, yeah, I'll put in some pictures because pictures are great. It's a wonderful visual medium. Let's mash it up with prose.
So there's a picture.
I love it.
First of all, the Canada's Vonnegut thing is what a lie that was. So
I accept it.
I almost died when I got it. I got it from Will
It's
Ferguson,
incredible.
who's
Yes.
Canada's like Mark Twain or something. Famous humorist and Giller Prize winner and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So funny story. I read his first book. I don't know if you know Why I Hate Canadians. If you've ever seen that book. Just this funny, like wise ass book. And I picked it up when I was in university, wandering the world, lost, and read it and thought it was hilarious and thought and it was a revelation that people could write like that. And so it really like recommitted me to wanting to write. And then a few years later, he was releasing his next book, and he's from Calgary, so he was doing the launch in Calgary, and I went to it at the library, and I took my little like dog-eared copy of Why I Hate Canadians, and I stood in line, and I was like, "Oh, Mr. Ferguson, I'm such a fan, and this book inspired me to be a writer and study Canada and all this stuff." And he's like, "Oh, that's just so great. If you ever write anything you want me to read, don't hesitate to send it." And he wrote his email address in the book.
Wow.
In 2003, and
wow.
We were blurb hunting for Dirty Birds, and I was like, I know Will Ferguson, kind of. I have his email address, and I emailed him out of the blue with like a crappy third draft Word document, and he turned it around in like a weekend and called it Vonnegut, and I almost died.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So yeah, he's like the nicest man on earth, and he's doing an event with me last week. I'm very.
Speaking of unstuck in time,
I was very nervous about it, but it was great. He's such a nice guy. But yeah, the pictures, it was tricky. I can understand why more people don't do it, because you also have to draw a lot of pictures, and you have to try and figure out what pictures to draw and why you're doing it and why you would subject yourself to writing a novel and then drawing the pictures.
But aren't those the same questions you ask yourself whenever you're writing anything? It's like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? Is this worth the effort?
But then you have to ask them twice because there's pictures involved.
It's true.
And I've noticed somebody who lives in my house is writing a graphic novel, and there's a lot of asking that question. God help her. So it was, I've always been a fan of illustrated fiction. I've always been a fan of right from like the kids' books with like the like chapter plates and stuff, to Vonnegut stuff with just little doodles wherever. And Breakfast of Champions was the first place I ever saw that and was like fascinated by it.
Like, you can do this? You're allowed to do this?
Yeah, I'm easily persuaded of things. And so I wanted to do something, some kind of illustrations. And the way I eventually justified it to myself was it's sort of the objects that tell Milton's story alongside the narrative that tells his story. So it starts off with, like a super bed bug is central to the early plot of the story. And horse meat is something that comes up. And so you can kind of get the gist of his story through these objects, but then also present them kind of in a not fully technical drawing kind of way, but in just these simple line drawings, so that they're kind of almost like exhibits in a court case or something. Like this is all the evidence against Milton for his crimes and of being just a loser. And it was hard to pick the ones, and I think I drew like 200 of them, but between me and the editor, we negotiated up to 60 could be included in the book, and I think there's like 65 made it. And, but it's interesting, and it was fun, and most of the feedback I've gotten has been positive. So
no, I have this grand theory that sort of ties into comics and illustrated prose, where if maybe I can do it. I don't have a book within reach, but like if you hold up a book of prose next to, say, a page of comics,
Yeah.
your eye will go towards the illustrations because they're inherently more fun. And it's like how watching a bad movie is still kind of fun because watching a moving picture is fun. Looking at a still photo or a still picture in a book has that innate entertainment to it. And so I feel like when you have illustrated books, even if it's just the author drawing stuff that connects to the story, it makes the book better just by its very nature. And it's astounding because I had the same experience where I read Breakfast Champions. I know I read Slaughterhouse-Five first, which has a few pictures, and Breakfast Champions has more. But this idea of, oh, you can do that. Like, I didn't know that was allowed. I thought as you got older, you had fewer and fewer pictures in your books because that's what growing up means.
Yeah.
And this idea that you can just do what you want to tell the story in the best way is so exciting and freeing. And I'd seen that done in Vonnegut's work, and I've seen it in a few places, but I hadn't seen it done for a long time until I saw it in Dirty Birds. And I was just like, it was like a friendly handshake or a warm sweater. Something just like, oh yes, this book gets me already just from the start.
Well, it's hard because there's very few examples. So I didn't know like where to look because like Breakfast of Champions is heavily illustrated, you could say, but everything is related to the text. So he's like, here's a picture of whatever, and then you draw the picture. They're labeled as figures, and they're kind of like more, they're related to the text, but they're not referred to directly in the text.
Right.
So I don't know. It was a lot of just experimentation to figure it out, but it's out there now, and nobody's tracked me down. So
well, it's too late to change it. So there it is.
It's been printed.
No, I mean, I had a thing in Slaughterhouse where I noticed there was a mistake in what I had written, and it was a mistake in a critical passage. It was a typo that I had put in and no one had caught it. And I sent an email to the whole team saying, to my editor and to Albert, the artist, and it's like, I'm so sorry I ruined this book because there's a typo here and it's destroyed. And it took me like an hour to write that email because I wanted to feel sincere because it wasn't here. I felt horrible. And then like 4 hours later, my editor emailed back and she was like, oh no, we caught that at the proofreading stage. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Such a relief to have not ruined it. But it's all these small choices you make, right? That add up to the final book.
So tell me about that with Vonnegut, because Kurt sent you this way too long script.
Right, yeah. And it took me a while to get around to it.
Yeah. And it sat on your desk for 50, 60 years. And then how do you go from taking an iconic classic book that many people love, and you said you were terrified of ruining it, but how do you start to turn that into something visual? And how much of it is, do you just like condense the story down as short as possible and then be like, here, draw this? Or do you work with the artist to figure out how are we going to make this visual?
Yeah. Normally I like to talk to the artist and be like, how are we going to do this? But for this project, I had fully written the script before we found Albert, the artist, to draw it. And so it was just me. And that's hard because normally I like to meet the artist and at least have a conversation where I say, like, what do you like to draw? And what do you hate to draw? If you hate drawing hands, people wear mittens all the time. Like we can solve problems. Because I want the book, because like the artist always has the hard job. You're married to someone who draws comics. You know that it takes half an hour to read a comic and that can take you years to draw. Like drawing takes time in a way that writing doesn't. And so I was trying to get as much as I could in the writing done. So putting in photo references where I could find them, stuff like that. So the process was basically I bought a new copy of Slaughterhouse-Five with really thick margins, and I reread the book and I scribbled all my notes like, oh, we have to have this line, we have to have this line. Because you're right, like a big part of it is condensing it, but you don't want it to feel condensed. My bellwether was I wanted someone who had read the prose novel, had read Slaughterhouse-Five, and read this comic to not feel like something was missing. So you have to include all the important lines, the lines that like really punch you in the heart. Those have to be there, but also you can't include everything. So you have to, I guess it's almost like haiku, sort of distill it down.
Yeah.
My other main thing I did was I treated each page as kind of a unit. So if I could break the story into chunks, then I could have each chunk fit on a page or 2 pages or 3 pages. So like, here's an example, and this is probably the worst way to see it, but it's where Billy's meeting his mother later in life and she's dying. And that scene just functions as 1 page. And then once we're done with the page, you can turn it and we're on to a 2-page scene where he's disgracefully drunk at a party and being unfaithful to his wife for the first and only time. So it was a lot of, well, I'll tell you what it is. I wrote all my notes in this book. And then I said, all right, now I got a marked up copy of Slaughterhouse-Five, which is still not a comic. And then the nerdiest part of this process was where I worked out how many pages my prose copy had and how many pages I wanted the graphic novel to be, which was 170-ish. That gave me a compression ratio, which I could keep updated as I worked my way through the book. So I knew that the way I'm condensing this, the way I'm writing this so far, is a little bit too long, a little bit too short, but it gave me confidence that I wouldn't reach, page 169 and realize I've got 100 pages worth of prose left to put in this book and I've ruined it. Like, you can edit text a lot easier than you can edit a comic script because the page is your fundamental unit and you're kind of basically reduced to removing pages. You can't cut out a panel and reshuffle all your panels because it ruins the graphic novel itself, which is built on, it's getting kind of theoretical, but my theory of writing comics is that since the page is your unit, you're working off the base unit of the page. And so you want a reason to turn the page every time. What that lower right-hand panel will be a question that gets answered or something that's revealed, or it's something that gives you a reason to go, oh, I need to turn the page to find out what happens next or what the answer to this question is. And so cutting a panel you can't just reflow that across the entire book. You have to really cut out a whole page. And I didn't want to do that. So that is a long answer to a simple question of, how did you do this? But it was partly this equation I had, partly holistic of trying to find what worked and what didn't, and trying to make it all feel like it had been born in comics in the first place.
Because I haven't read Slaughterhouse-Five in probably, I don't want to say how old I am, but since university, so 15 plus years.
Now I know you're over 18 and have gone to university.
I was very precocious 3-year-old. And it was interesting reading it again after I had just finished your take on it, because like the first chapter is in the novel is a lot of him like wringing his hands about having to write his Dresden book.
Yeah.
And eventually having to, and telling everybody he's writing this Dresden book and never writing a Dresden book. And then eventually it becomes his Dresden book. And you boiled that down to just a few pages. But you did it so beautifully that you took out all of his like neuroses, but kept his sort of neuroses enough and his voice enough.
Thank you.
Because he writes with a personality and a voice that's distinctly his. Kept that, but you could also, it felt at the same time that this is a Ryan North adaptation of this. It was, so you could kind of see both of your brains working in tandem.
Yeah.
Really cool. And it did for me, you were successful for me anyways, in making it kind of a standalone thing and also a great sort of, if you're a huge fan of Slaughterhouse-Five, it's not
like a companion.
A good companion piece. Yeah, it's not like a lesser version or just the like.
Thank you.
Our baby Mary, my sister sent these illustrated condensed children's classics. So like Treasure Island or whatever, and they're like these little books, and there's a picture, and then like 20 words, and then
right.
It was not like that.
I crossed that far.
Condensed thing. It was a beautiful book on its own.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the sort of choices I made was to change the first line of the book, which once the book actually begins, it's all this happened more or less. And in the graphic novel, it's all this happened to Kurt more or less, because I wanted to, like, he is a character in his own book. He's central to it. Yeah. I wanted to keep that, but we also have to acknowledge that, like, this is a different medium and there's a different author with at least one finger on the wheel here. And let's distance that a bit so that we still keep Kurt, but I'm not trying to be him. There were places where I did actually have to try to be him, where, you know, he would have a climactic speech and literally not tell you what was said. He'll just tell you what it felt like, yeah. The gist of it. And that works great in prose, but that does not work in comics. So I had to write some of these speeches that show up in the book. And it was actually really fun, because I'm sure you've experienced this too as a writer, that when you read Kurt Vonnegut, you get Kurt Vonnegut disease, and everything you write immediately afterwards sounds like Kurt Vonnegut. You have to stop that so you have your own voice. But when you're adapting him, you get to lean into it. So I just got to, like, write like Kurt Vonnegut and try to pass so that you wouldn't be able to tell the Ryan parts from the Vonnegut
That's
parts.
why you had that mustache for all those years.
Yeah. Speaking of, like, people who you're trying to capture, I'm so interested in Dirty Birds that Leonard Cohen is a character. And I wanted to ask you about that, because that felt to me like, oh, this is one of the rules you can't break, but you did it and it worked. And, like, was there any reticence, or did you feel like, no, man, he's in my book, done, question over?
I didn't have any reticence, but everybody who read early drafts, and my editors and everybody did. And they all, the first question I got from everybody who read, like, early drafts, besides my mother, she said, "Do you have to swear so much?" But
sorry, Mom.
There have to be so many F words.
I think there was the average amount of F words, to my recollection.
Yeah, there's a couple characters who swear more than usual amount. I don't know. She also was curious about why there were so many phallic imagery. And
you were like, I don't know, Mom, it's a mystery. Next, yeah. Next question.
But no, I was intent on putting Leonard in even when he was still alive, and everybody came back to me right away and was like, "Does it have to be Leonard? Could it be just like an old washed-up singer with a fedora and a black turtleneck? Does it have to be Leonard?"
No, it's got to be Leonard.
It's got to be Leonard, and everybody loves Leonard so much, and I'm through the process of, like, doing a little bit of research. His character is a villain, so it's not like he's true to his life or anything, but doing enough research so it seemed and sounded like him and be somewhat feasible. It cured me of any, like, fascination and over-the-top appreciation of Leonard Cohen.
Having to inhabit him and walk in his shoes, where you think, yeah, he's not that great.
Yeah, and like, listen to a lot of his music for a couple months. Like, the guy was a bit of a creep, and so much of his music
and wrote songs about it.
Is about being a creep, and his music is either two kinds. It's this very, like, vague and poetic, like Hallelujah, where it's about
Hallelujah, yeah.
But people play it at funerals. Or it's this out and out, like, disgusting sleaze, like Chelsea Hotel is probably the most famous one, but he's got worse ones. Just, like, go into some of the deeper tracks on Death of a Ladies' Man, and you'll be like, whoa, Leonard. Not okay.
Where does famous Blue Raincoat fit in this spectrum?
Oh, that one's also a famous Blue Raincoat, that one. But yeah, and so I wasn't too worried about sullying his good name, and like, if you like Leonard Cohen, you'll get that this isn't actually Leonard Cohen doing all the horrible things in the book.
I mean, that's
on Goodreads was very upset about it.
I mean, I felt like the joy of it is that even someone with a cursory knowledge of Leonard Cohen, I'm not a Leonard Cohen expert, can recognize, like, this is clearly not the man. And I'm sure Leonard Cohen doesn't go around, like, quoting his songs and talking about like all the tea from China or whatever, or oranges came all the way from China. But it reminded me a lot of Shakespeare, actually, because I'd written these choose your own path versions of Shakespeare books, and part of the fun there was that Shakespeare is such a canonized character that it felt like you were breaking the rules to debase him down to this low medium.
Yeah.
And having Cohen show up and be this villain, be this fun, like delicious, horrible villain, felt the same way. Like, you can't do that, but you can do that, and it's great.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to show my face in Montreal again, but we'll see what happens when COVID lets up. But yeah, it was fun, and like, I had legal questions about, like, copyright questions, like what can you do? Because I had to change. Milton appears as a subject of a top 10 list on a iconic late night TV show.
Mm-hmm.
I had to change the name of the host and the name of the show and all of that.
But Cohen's fine. Lenny was fine.
The answer I got from the editor was the dead can't sue you or something. So he can haunt me, I guess.
I mean, it's true. When I worked with Bill on Shakespeare, he couldn't sue me due to being dead.
Yeah, what's he gonna do? But it's like it's enough not Cohen that I think I'm okay.
Oh yeah, it's not like a Cohen biography. It's just a great character that I loved. Can you speak, Morgan? Can you speak for a bit on the character of Robin in your book? Because she's this documentary filmmaker who is working for years on this small project, and I will tell you that seeing that and seeing the characters in Montreal that surround our hero, it felt very familiar. I was like, oh, I know that person. And I've either met that person or I've seen that person in the mirror at times. And I feel like the honesty there, I'm not sure if I want to insult you by saying, oh, you must have lived it too, and you just remember what you saw, or compliment you by saying you've captured that type of experience in people's lives or that moment in time so well. So I guess what I'm wondering is how much of this is autobiographical and where does it all come from?
Well, too much of it is autobiographical. A lot of it, it's kind of an episodic novel. So each kind of disastrous episode Milton goes through started from a place of autobiography. So I grew up in rural middle nowhere. He grew up in rural middle nowhere. I left the farm for college, and so did he. And I moved to Montreal, and so did he. And
Did your luggage break open on your move to Montreal?
No, I took a taxi from the airport.
Good for you.
Which was very costly, but I had at least enough sense to do that. And I lived in a dumpy apartment with a bunch of strangers who were all kind of weird. And I used them as kind of points of departure. I worked for my Newfoundland roommate's shoddy construction company in real life for 2 whole days, got enough material and moved on with my life. But part of it was when I was there, and I'm sure it still exists to a certain extent, there was this really sort of booming Anglophone bubble in downtown Montreal in the sort of Plateau neighborhood. A lot of it is because there's 2 big English universities there, Concordia and McGill, but a lot of it is also because rent was very cheap, the cost of living was very inexpensive, so there was a lot of post-grad people, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds from mostly Toronto, but all over the country, moving to Montreal because you could live with 4 roommates in a dumpy, huge, old apartment for, I think I paid $150 a month rent.
Wow.
For a hovel in a...
Yeah, but that's a low cost of living.
That's a low cost of living. And so you didn't need to make much money to live. And like the groceries, the local grocers had like the half price 2-for-1 pineapples.
Yeah, we used to get, we called them sketch berries because they were the berries that were going to be thrown out unless you bought them now.
Yeah.
And you had to eat them right away because they would rot the next day.
Exactly. So there was these 2 fruit stands right side by side. And apparently year before I got there, they were firebombing each other because they were connected to different mafias or something. But anyway, they had made peace by the time I got there. And it took me about 10 years to figure out that half price 2-for-1 pineapples is a horrible deal. It's just full price for bad pineapple. But and day-old bagels from the famous St. Viator bagel place because they were really cheap. So I lived off all that stuff. But when I was in that bubble, and then sort of before and after and since, as sort of a dilettante artist, I've met so many Robins.
Yeah.
So many of these characters who take themselves very seriously. And on one hand, I admire their ability to do that because I can't do that. And I'm stricken with imposter syndrome and guilt and shame for even thinking that anybody dare read a word I write. But also, so many of them are full of it. So Robin in the book, she makes 2 films, and the first film is called Dirty Birds, and it is a 7-minute black and white silent short film about seagulls in a dump in Calcutta, and it took her 3 years to make it. And she talks about it like it's this life and death kind of thing, and she complains about the BBC won't pay her enough for the rights to air it and all this stuff. And there's other people in the book. This one guy has a giant paper mache penis on the back of a military truck, like a missile that he drives around town while he plays ice cream music. And, you know, there's a lot of people like that. And getting the chance to go back and look at the poetry I wrote in Montreal during this time, like when I was trying to be serious about this stuff, it was all terrible. And like taking yourself so seriously, it was all terrible. And it was just another way that you kind of become divorced from this reality where there might be something valuable in a movie about seagulls in the dump in Calcutta, but Robin is adamant that it's not about like poverty or waste or anything. It's about the seagulls being trapped in this landfill with filthy humans and stuff. And so it's, just Robins are everywhere, and it's sort of by design, and kind of how it ended up was that Robin is sort of the most together with it, level-headed of the bunch.
Yeah.
And she's making these stupid friggin' movies. So it's satire / farce. So a lot of the characters are a bit, you know, more outlandish than Robin, but just the seriousness they take in their art. And like there's an episode in the novel where they go to a house party, these 2 guys who live in a shopping mall, and that isn't autobiography, that's my brother's biography. He lived in Vancouver, but he lived next to this guy. It was this like old obsolete shopping mall in Chinatown where there was like 2 stores that didn't sell anything, and the owner was in Hong Kong, and it was just like a money laundering front, and they would rent it out if you had a business. And so there was a bunch of artists figured this out and lived in there and said they had these businesses. And one guy who lived next to him made masks, these really elaborate chicken masks out of Lego. And he was the most serious artist I've ever encountered in my life. And he's making Lego chicken masks. So Robins are everywhere. Look out.
It's amazing. I did want to tell you that now that I know that you made up the losing the luggage story as you're dragging it, as Milton's dragging it across the city, something very close happened to me like 2 years ago, where I was in a town to do a book talk, and I got off the train from the plane station, and my hotel was like far enough away that I did and should have looked up how much a cab cost, but close enough that I thought I can make an easy $20 by just walking this myself.
Yeah.
And the wheel locked on my luggage, and I'm like, oh, I'll just drag it, you know, won't be that hard. And then that like an eraser rubbed the wheel down until it fell off. So I was like, whatever, I'll just drag it. It's harder to drag now. And then that bent the sticks on my luggage till they snapped off. So I was left with just a box I couldn't move. And I carried it a block before I realized, you know what? I'm an adult. I will call a cab, get the last few meters of this. And that sense of I'm young and I'm smart and I'm clearly making a mistake, but I'm so far into it now that like I can't stop. I really related to that.
Yeah, we were all young and smart once, weren't we?
We sure were.
Um,
Now we're here.
I wanted to ask you about the launch of your book, because it's a remarkable book about a remarkable book, um, which should set the world on fire, but it came out during a pandemic. What was that like?
well, Morgan, you may have some experience with this. I mean, it's interesting because on one hand, I feel like people, after an initial shock of everything going wrong for a long time and continues to go wrong, but one of the things you can do when you are stuck at home and can't leave because you don't want to kill people or get sick yourself, and you've watched all the movies and they're not making new ones, and you've read or you've played all the video games, you can read a book. And I feel like people are reading more books than they probably would have otherwise this year. But it's hard to launch a book and not be able to go out and meet people. Like honestly, the best part of writing a book is when you do an event and someone comes up and they say, I read this and I'm buying a second copy, or I've loved your previous work, or I just really like what you do. Because, and you can probably speak to this too, writing is a lonely job. And it is nice that, you know, someone will appreciate it and someone will seek it out. So I've found a lot of benefit, an odd amount of benefit actually, than what normally happens in seeing people's just, you know, online reviews of the book or their experience, sharing it on Twitter. I'm like, yes, you've read it. Thank you. And it's weird because normally when I write a book or I have a book come out, I feel very close to the book because it's my baby. And if someone compliments the book, you have the natural Canadian modesty to be like, oh, you know, thanks. I just whipped it off, or, you know, it's not that great, but I'm glad you liked it. Like that sort of modesty is, I think, baked into us. But with Slaughterhouse, like Vonnegut wrote the novel, Albert did the hard work of drawing it. I just adapted it. And so it feels like I had like the one little finger on the wheel, and it's not super my book in the way that the other books are. And so when people compliment Slaughterhouse-Five, they say, oh, this is a great book. I'm like, isn't it? Isn't it great? Let's talk about how cool this book is in a way that would be shameful, I think, if I'd done it everything myself. But since I just adapted, I feel like I can almost stand beside it and be like, yeah, this is a cool book. Let's talk about it. So I guess to throw that back to you, do you feel shame when talking about your accomplishments?
I don't know any better because this is the only book I've ever launched. So aren't they all like this? Like the world shut down? I've got to do, because I'm in Atlantic Canada, we had the Atlantic bubble all summer.
So jealous.
The whole region was like down to zero COVID. So in October, I did like 4 or 5 book festivals, and they were all on Zoom, except for one event for the one Cape Breton festival they had outside in a park by a ocean, and it was awesome. And I got to read out loud, and in the middle of it, Mary came up and like hugged me, and everybody laughed.
Adorable.
But then people would come up to you after and buy the book and be like, or say I've read the book, and it was the first time I had like actual interaction. But I've gotten a lot of like emails or Facebook messages from people I haven't talked to in a long time. They're like, I read this book that a friend recommended, and the name sounded vaguely familiar. So I Googled it, and it's you. Who knew? And that's been very gratifying and heartwarming to get messages from people who like the book. And now even since the long list thing, it's been crazy because we set up a bunch of events, but also the book sold out. So more than my family have read it now. And so some strangers are starting to give feedback.
These letters you get from family and old friends who haven't heard for a while, do they end with like P.S. Am I one of the Ashleys? Or because that's a danger of semi-autobiographical, is that people don't know what the autobiography is and what the non-autobiographical parts are, and they kind of think it's all autobiographical, right?
So no one who is the basis of a character has hunted me down yet. But a few mutual friends have asked, is this person that person? Um, and no, they're totally different people. They just work in similar industries and speak with a similar accent.
Dangerous game you're playing, Morgan.
It's my first book. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna get assassinated for it, I guarantee you.
So I presume you've enjoyed it. Like, are you going to do more? Or is this like, yeah, we've tried writing a novel. A lot of work. Not for me.
Oh, it's been fun. And I I don't know if it's because I didn't have to go out in public to do it, but the sales part was kind of the part I was dreading the most because I'm very shy and introverted, and sitting in a room typing away suits me just fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you hear from a lot of writers, and a lot of my friends who have done books before are always like selling it's the worst part, and being like the salesman piece of it.
Really?
So
I would disagree. I think the worst part is asking people for blurbs, which you just knocked out the park, because then you're sort of being like, hey, because you by design you want someone who is more famous than you to do a blurb, and so you always feel like you're asking someone something of someone you don't really feel justified to ask, and
yeah,
it feels weirdly transactional, like you're asking them to do something for you for no reason. I hate the whole thing. I don't like it at all.
I agree, and I got turned down by some marginally famous people, and this is the Will Ferguson thing. Was we were like down to crunch time because my book was supposed to come out in October 2019, and we were like, will we or won't we make the deadline? We don't have any blurbs. What are we going to do? And I was like, screw it. I'll email Will Ferguson. What do we got to lose?
Wow.
But the rest of the like famous people, other than Lisa Moore, who's like also the greatest, a lot of other famous people turned me down. But that's whatever. But the like putting yourself out there and having to talk about yourself and all this stuff is sometimes awkward. But I just figured, like, I just leaned into it and it was like, most of it is just talking to a computer screen in my living room anyway. So,
But also, like, I always like this because I feel like when you're talking about the book or talking about yourself, you know all the answers. You wrote the thing.
yeah.
I can't stump you and be like, aha, you didn't study hard enough. So it always feels to me like it's a test that's very easy to pass.
Yeah. And so it's that was the part I was kind of, I'd never asked for blurbs before, so I didn't know how awful it is, and I'm dreading it.
Now you do.
Time, especially. And I'm dreading it for when people ask me for blurbs, if they ever do. God help them, because it takes me like 8 years to read a book. Here's that blurb you wanted. But yeah, I found the writing part was nice. The editing was more enjoyable than I thought. The like talking about it is better than everything's been better than I thought it would be. Except for the like psyching myself up to do it to start with. I don't know if you've ever had this, but like, who am I to write a book? And
Oh yeah.
What gives me the right to put my name next to Kurt Vonnegut's?
Oh my God.
Those feelings.
What does give me the right to do that? What am I doing? So, I mean, I agree with you, and I feel like there have been books that I have started and then stopped because I couldn't justify the existence of that particular book. I mean, I have never written a novel at all. I've written graphic novels, but doing what you've done, sitting down and saying, I'm going to tell a story, the beginning, middle, and end, and it's going to be this piece of prose that will argue for its own existence is something I have not been able to accomplish. And frankly, I find terrifying. I feel like comics, I can, like they sort of argue for themselves. This is, like I say, an innately fun medium.
Yeah.
But it's hard to write a book. And so I guess my selfish question is, do you have, like, have you started on a second book? is there ideas you're kicking around? Like, where are you in that process?
There's ideas I'm kicking around. Through the jigs and the reels of publishing conundrums, I've got myself an agent, I think. Um,
Question mark?
they're not repping me on this book, so we'll see about the next one. But their suggestion was I wrote a weird master's thesis in grad school, and they suggested, why don't you see about adapting that into an actual book of nonfiction?
What did you study in grad school?
Interdisciplinary humanities, so humanity.
So it's not like you study creative writing and you have this novel in a drawer. It's you have a master's thesis on interdisciplinary humanities. That could be. I'm very curious to see how that gets transformed into a novel.
Well, it was going to be nonfiction, I had assumed, and so I'd been writing a nonfiction proposal and struggling mightily because it's like a 10-year-old piece
thesis
of mediocre academia. And then the novel came out, and it's done far better than I had ever expected it to. And I'm being asked now, what's your next novel about? And so I'm like, oh, geez, I gotta write another novel. And I think just like career wise, because you know that, or you should, if you don't, that just publishing a small independently published book in Canada will not allow you to quit your day job.
No, it's weird. You'd think it would.
It's weird. It won't even, it's barely even like one mortgage payment. So, you know, hoping one day to be able to write more than sort of when Mary's napping and I'm not at work, I would, you know, I think a novel would be the right next move. So I got to figure that out. And I'm also feeling now like it's got to be better than Dirty Birds, and it's got to be bigger. It's got to be 1,000 pages and
oh no,
300 illustrations.
This is the trap of the arts, right? Where the trap of the arts, my theory of the arts is that if you have a real job, a regular job, and you work hard, you can get promoted, get a raise, whatever. There's some correlation, not direct, but there's some correlation between the work you put in and what comes out of it. Well, with the arts, that's completely disconnected. You can work really hard and nobody cares, or you can whip something off and people think it's the greatest thing ever. And so you really can't, you need to never value yourself connected to how the art you produce works. And that's really hard, right? Like that's, I've been, you know, writing comics for almost 20 years and I'm still catch myself thinking like, oh, that, you know, that last thing didn't do very well. So I must be a worse person than I thought I was. Or, oh, the Slaughterhouse book's doing great. I must be an innately good person. Like your brain wants to draw those equal signs and they don't exist.
Yeah, so I was nobody and nothing till I got longlisted, and now look at me.
Yeah.
Now I have to write the next War and Peace.
Well, just take your thesis and put Leonard Cohen into it, and you've got yourself a novel.
There you go. I'll change Descartes to Leonard Cohen, and everything will be fine.
Quick search replace. You're off to the races.
Yeah. So probably when I formulate an idea, I'll step back from this ledge of sure failure and figure that out. But yeah, I'm working on figuring it out. What about you? How do you follow up the greatest novel ever written? Turn to the greatest graphic.
Well, if you thought Vonnegut was good, wait till you get a taste of just me. No, I am working on a sequel, a spiritual sequel to How to Met Everything. So it's nonfiction, but How to Met Everything was sort of a non-fictional core with a fictional candy coating, with the idea that, oh, you're trapped in the past, you have a time machine that broke. Here's the situation. Here's the nonfiction that comes out of that.
Yeah.
So this new book is sort of doing that in a different way. You're not still trapped in the past, but you're having fun with fictionalizing nonfiction for a premise of a book, I guess, is a very academic way to say, it's a cool premise that I put some facts into.
How to destroy things?
You'll have to wait to find out until I think spring 2022 maybe is when it might be coming out. We'll see.
It's like a whole year
and a bit, but it still feels tight because I'm still revising it and trying to incorporate notes and stuff. But yeah, I feel like I work very hard to not try to attach my self-worth to the products coming out, to the books coming out, and hopefully they'll stand or fail in their own merits. But it's weird, right? Like it's like anything in the arts, there's an element of randomness, and you really have to just accept that that's the way it goes. But I'm like, as just like a pal of Morgan's, I'm thrilled to see Dirty Birds doing so well and like getting all this attention in Canadian media. And that's hard. Like, as much as it's hard to write a book, it's also hard to get people to care about a book. Even harder.
It helps a lot that there's nothing else going on. I've been on the radio in Saskatchewan like 4 or 5 times, and it's just because I send out press releases being like, this book, which is set partially in Saskatchewan for the first chapter. And CBC calls me up and they're like, put you on the radio Sunday morning.
So what you're saying is I should set a scene in Saskatchewan.
You should. And you should name a character Milton, Ontario, and their library will call you up and shower you with events and sell dozens of copies of your book.
So I've never been to Australia. I could name a character like Australia. Australia. Middle name Free Meals.
You got it made.
Perfect. Got it set for life.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's been a while. We've chatted.
Yeah, it's been great I feel like as much as this has been a conversation that we are both aware is being recorded and is for public consumption, it also feels like this has just been a couple pals hanging out and talking about making books.
Just zooming.
Just hanging out on Zoom, which we all do these days, due to having no other option to experience other humans.
Weeks in the past, I did a Zoom event with my little small town library where I come from, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's open like one afternoon a week, I think. Anyway, the librarian sent me a picture of the library, so I made it my Zoom background.
Oh, nice.
I was there. And then the librarian, she fell asleep putting her kid to bed, so she wasn't even at the event. It was just like my mom, all my aunts, my brother and sister, and a few of my mom's like book club friends.
Oh, that's great.
And so we had this lovely chat about books and stuff, and they asked some great questions. And then afterwards, because I was hosting the Zoom, everybody left except for my family, and then we just chatted for a long time after. So it was kind of like if I was there in real life, we would have just been hanging out. So anyway.
Yeah. My small town library story was before COVID. When I was a kid, I was banned from the Osgoode Public Library because the librarian thought that I had somehow taken out a children's encyclopedia and failed to return it and wanted the, thousands of dollars for that encyclopedia, which was impossible because you're not allowed to take out that encyclopedia. It was clearly a clerical error on their end.
Reference
only, exactly. So she banned me from the library until I paid the money, which I was never going to pay. And I was like 6. And then I thought, I'll just wait this out until she moves somewhere else. But she kept moving up in the library system until she was in charge of all the Ottawa libraries. I was going, oh my God, I'm in trouble. But the last time I was back in Ottawa for a book event, it turns out that she had retired, and a woman I went to school with, elementary, middle, and high school, now worked at the Osgoode Public Library. She was responsible for it, and she officially unbanned me. So I am back in with the OPL.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I got a free encyclopedia out of it. Kidding, I didn't.
How do you write a book about inventing everything? You need a children's encyclopedia.
You need a children's encyclopedia. And I thought ahead when I was 6. Anyway, all this to say, I love libraries and librarians, and except for the one that banned me for life. But everything else has been great.
Before we go, one more serious book question. Do
Yeah.
you have a favorite part of Slaughterhouse-Five, or is it like you're so sick of it now?
No, I read the book and I read the comic even, and it doesn't feel like I'm reading my own stuff. And one of my favorite parts in both the comic and the prose one, and I'll show it to you because I feel like Albert maybe did it even better in comics than it was in prose. So
Elvira is amazing, by the way. It's a beautiful,
well, thank you.
beautiful book. So
Yeah, he did such a good job. So
good for finding them.
I guess I'm going to spoil Slaughterhouse-Five. If you haven't read it, you're 50 years too late. But there's these aliens of Tralfamadorians who experience time all at once. So they see the present, the past, and the future all in front of them. And at one point in the prose novel, Billy is given a book, a Tralfamadorian book to read. And Vonnegut describes it as these paragraphs that are just a single image that is sort of urgently communicated. And it is this, by seeing all these images together, that makes the book what it is. And I was thinking, as I was adapting, like, he's describing comics, like a single image in relation to other images on the page. That's comics. And so in the book, we have the page before where Billy asks for something to read, and then you get this 2-page spread of a Tralfamadorian book that's just these images. And on top of the images, it says, and this is my favorite passage, Billy was given a Tralfamadorian book. He couldn't read it, of course, but the aliens kindly explained how their language worked. Each image was a brief, urgent message describing a situation or scene which the Tralfamadorians read all at once. There was no particular relationship between the images, except the author had chosen them carefully, so that when seen all at once, they produced an image of life that was beautiful and surprising and deep. There was no beginning, no middle, no end, no surprise, no moral, no causes, no effects, just the depth of many marvelous moments seen together at the same instant. We spread that across the page. And I liked it in the prose, and I like it in comics because this was a sequence that I told earlier where I messed up. It said no morale. I put an extra E there. And I was like, I ruined the book in my favorite sequence, and Albert did such a beautiful job. Thankfully, they caught it, but it was like a knife through the heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that part too. That was very good. I lulled at the parts where you kept in all the like comics commentary.
Oh yeah, I should have mentioned the trick we did was he has this failed science fiction author, and we just made him a failed comics author, so he's even fallen even lower in the cultural totem pole.
But then these like highly evolved beings, they just read comics. It's great.
Yeah, that's the meta commentary on the whole medium. So once you're done your next novel and your next nonfiction, I recommend starting to write some funny books. I would read some Morgan comics.
I would write them. I don't want to have to draw them because Katie's been working on hers for like 4 years.
Yeah, she pranked herself pretty good.
Yeah, good job, Katie. We met under the pretenses of her asking me a question about that book, so I'm worried what happens when that book is done. If she's like, I don't need you anymore.
She's been playing the long con.
So next book is about some hulky Australian men. So later.
Yeah, I got to call the chaperone another date. I'll be right there. Like, oh, sorry, Morgan.
No. Oh, well, thanks, Ryan, for joining me on the Loser Tour.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
It's a beautiful
anytime
to be in Saskatoon or Winnipeg or the other Winnipeg location for McNally. Thanks, McNally, for hosting us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
I'm glad we had no technical difficulties during this live event because they can just derail the whole thing.
Yep. We nailed it.
So we'll see you down the road.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.